At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Dès ma première rencontre avec M. Nehru, Delhi et à Chandigarh,
how from being a totally dusty plain, Chandigarh is now covered with greenery.
City must grow. It must be given a direction.
Hello and welcome to The Story of Chandigarh, a podcast about how the modernist city of Chandigarh came into being and what its future might look like. This is Ishan Chawla, and with me is Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash. In today's episode, we talk about the museum complex in Sector 10, the various buildings and typologies, and the process of translation in Corbusian design thinking. We explore the evolution of the concepts of the Museum of Infinite Growth, the Mundaneum, and the Miracle Box, and also discuss the calmness of the museum complex. So today, let's talk about the museum complex in Sector 10, designed as part of the program to cultivate the mind and the body. And it includes the Art Museum, the Architecture Museum, the Natural History Museum, and the College of Art, right?
Right.
So maybe the first question is how this project was cited in this location. I was reading the book by Remy, and it said it was cited so that it would fall sort of between the city center and the university, roughly, and between the Janmarg and the Leisure Valley, sort of very, let's say, significant vertical circulation systems.
Right. So there were a couple of reasons for its location. One is that, as you are saying, there was supposed to be kind of a pedestrian throughway from Sector 17, which is kind of the commercial heart and the public heart of the city, to the capital complex, which is the administrative and intellectual brain of the city. And along that path fell the museum complex. So, and in fact, if you look in the old plans, there's a kind of a yellow line, yellow path, which shows a direct connection from the two, which is what that bridge, that unused pedestrian bridge that goes over the road that goes to the High Court in the Capitol complex. That was supposed to be the pedestrian bridge that helps link the plaza of the Capitol to Neelam Plaza along Janmarg. And that was supposed to go past the Government Museum complex.
I see. Is that the ramp that goes from the Tourist Information Center to the plaza now?
Yes, that's right. That's the ramp.
Sure.
That's the bridge, yes, yeah.
But that would fall on the other side of the Janmarg.
That's right. It does fall on the other side of the Janmarg. So that's an issue. Whereas this museum complex is on this side. If that path was fully implemented, there would have to be some kind of an underpass that links that path from Neelam Plaza to the Capitol Plaza. So the underpass that has been built from Sector 17 to Rose Garden would be congruent with that kind of thinking.
Right.
But it should also have gone to the museum complex. So that's the one reason. And the other reason is also, like you said, that it's located in the Leisure Valley. And the Leisure Valley is the care of body and spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it, the Leisure Valley from the point of view of the classic Corbusier diagram from the 1920s and 30s, in which the tall buildings were lifted on pilotis above the ground, and the city was compacted into kind of this tower, and the ground plane floated or sort of passed under the building, right? Since that was not possible in Chandigarh, since there was no unités, since there were no piloti lifted tall buildings, and everything was flattened out, the Leisure Valley kind of, and the green belts going through the sectors all together were kind of the ground plane distributed across the city. Okay, so you have to see that a continuous ground plane, which is kind of split up and distributed across, kind of deconstructed. And Eisenman would like it because it's like an Eisenman deconstruction, not really a Derridian deconstruction. But the point being, so the museum complex gets put in the Leisure Valley as, in a sense, one of the institutions that supports the core function of the Leisure Valley, which is a care of body and spirit. The idea was that as the noble savage, a kind of a unencumbered human being, unencumbered by history and unfettered by the traditions of the past, unfettered by history, walked around in nature, nature meaning green valley, nature meaning leisure valley, nature meaning unspoiled land, he would need to cultivate new institutions, which are not traditional history museums, but new kinds of museums, new kind of institutions to help him ennoble himself. And that is why the museum complex was placed not next to Leisure Valley, it's supposed to be in Leisure Valley. And one would imagine conceptually it would be expected to have a untrammeled, full access from Leisure Valley. So that as you're running around Leisure Valley, along the way, you'll run up the ramp and go see some beautiful art and keep running, is kind of the concept for it.
But it's right off of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But it's all choreographed. I mean, the undulation of the Leisure Valley and the green belt gives the illusion of, unspoiled nature, as you said, but it's all sort of manicured and artificial, isn't it?
Yeah. So, it was translated into a colonial program, into a park. This is what we understood from the colonials, that these had to be made into parks in the style of London, like Hyde Park or Hampstead Heath
Finsbury.
or whatever. Oh, that's right. So, like the park around Albert Hall in Jaipur, or, the British were big on making parks. So when the Indians, Indian colonial influenced administration said, oh, there's this Leisure Valley, what to do with it? Well, let's make it into parks. So, which is not really how one would imagine the Leisure Valley. I mean, it's interesting to think what a Corbusian Leisure Valley truly implemented would feel like. I think it would feel more in the sense of a modern day conception of an ecological system, like the British or a colonial system of a park is a green space for upper class people to walk in peace with manicured, beautifully cultivated landscapes that look perfect, right?
Right, like a golf course or something.
Like basically a golf course, sort of like a nice place. I would imagine that a Corbusian leisure conception of a Leisure Valley would be more in sense of a native vegetation, natural ecology, multi-species, interactive kind of a landscape, which is sort of, in a sense, allowed to be wild and grow by itself. Wild.
Right.
Yeah.
Something along the lines of what's behind the lake, right? At the other end.
Something, yeah, that's right. That would be, that's fantastic. Yes, exactly. Imagine what is behind the lake, just continuing all the way down the Leisure Valley. Continuous, uninterrupted.
Right, no streets passing through.
No streets passing through. And this was also sort of his rewriting of from Corbusier's perspective, the stupidity of Central Park, right? Which also has this fantastic greenness in support of the urban, but is also, still very much a 19th century conception of a park.
So originally this was labeled as a cultural center.
Yes.
Right. Do you think that's still current, or is museum complex the correct or more accurate nomenclature?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the budget for the project came about because Lahore had a very important colonial museum that was run by J.L. Kipling, the father of Rudyard Kipling. So Lahore had a very important museum. And when the partition happened, half the artifacts of Lahore Museum came to India and half the artifacts of Lahore Museum went to Pakistan.
Right.
So the immediate purpose was that we had these artifacts, all the Indus artifacts, etc. And they needed a place to be housed. And so that is why a museum was needed. And J.L. Kipling, John Lockwood Kipling, had the museum in Lahore closely connected to his School of Art in Lahore, because the arts and crafts conception of what the purpose of a museum was to be closely connected to a school of art, because through art and through craft was the English civilizational process, that through high art and through the cultivation of Indian craft, and in a sense trying to bring them together, there would be the creation of a colonial Indian aesthetic, and with that would be the cultivation of a colonial Indian citizenship. So, that was really the argument of the arts and crafts enthusiasts working in India. And the prime example of that kind of work is the work by Swinton Jacobs in Jaipur when he made the Albert Hall Museum of Art and Craft. But it's all over the place. So anyway, the arts and crafts enthusiasts made all the first schools of art in India. So in Lahore, in Bombay, the JJ School of Art, in Jaipur, there was a School of Art, the Calcutta School of Art, the Delhi School of Art. So all these were arts and craft schools, and they were all attached to museums. And the idea was you study museums and you cultivate art through them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
so
quite
there's
powerful,
this
like the adjacency of theory and practice.
adjacency. That was the whole concept. So there was artifacts that had to be housed. So that's why there was a budget for the museum. And in the colonial system, there was a school of art attached to it. So that's how the program for the museum was approved. But of course, once Corbusier came on the scene, he reinterpreted the museum through his modernist rethinking of the museum. And they said, well, we need a school of art attached to it. He said, fine, I'll do a school of art, but there are all these other institutions that are also needed with a museum. And he designed the temporary exhibits pavilion, and there were supposed to be other things that, there was the, what do you call it?
Miracle Box?
Miracle Box. Yes, that's right.
Where the Natural History Museum is now.
Where the
Right.
Natural History Museum is, Randhawa interpreted as a natural history.
Let's start with the museum itself, the
Okay.
Museum of Art, which is derived from his ideas of Museum of Infinite Growth.
Correct.
Right.
That's right.
Which has a
That's
version in Ahmedabad, the Sanskar Kendra, and the Museum of Western Art in Tokyo.
That's right.
And they all kind of happened around the same time?
Yeah, basically in the 50s after the war, they all happened at the same time. But like you said, there is a long history of the museum in Corbusier's world. And it started in the 1920s. Corbusier and Pierre Jeanneret were designing the League of Nations project. I don't know if you remember that after World War I, there was this idea that there needs to be a world congress, a sort of a world community that can prevent future wars. And so they made a League of Nations, and that was cited in Geneva, and there was an open competition that was held for it. And Pierre Jeanneret and Le Corbusier submitted an entry, which was by all accounts considered by the, modernist people, taste arbiters, as the best entry, but their entry was disqualified simply because it was supposedly done in the wrong color of ink.
Really?
Yes. But, you imagine there must have been some politics behind it. So, but Corbusier and Jeanneret kind of established, of course, Corbusier got all the credit, but I insist on Pierre Jeanneret also as being, part of the team. And through that project, kind of emerged as one of the principal articulators of thinking international universalist modernism, because League of Nations was the perfect project for that, because that was the idea of universal congress of all people. So what would be an architecture of a institution of all people? Corbusier and Jeanneret kind of established themselves. So, but anyway, their entry was disqualified, but because of the fame that Corbusier gained from that entry, there was another guy called Paul Otlet, a Belgian kind of entrepreneur, information technology kind of a person, and he had some science patents and he had some money and things like that. And he came up with the idea that, well, a world political body that has to deliberate also needs a world museum, which is an institution that houses the knowledge of the entire world, right? So that they can, any information that they need, and it's not just data as we think about as information today, but anything they need to understand the history of places, the meaning of places, the understanding of cultural artifacts of things, should be accessible right next to the League of Nations. The World Congress should have a world museum. And he called this the Mundaneum. That translates to World Museum. And Paul Otlet's invention basically was that a world museum would have so much information and so many artifacts that the difficult thing would be to access that information and convey it to the League of Nations in a rapid fire manner. And he designed one of the earliest cataloging systems and rapid access systems, and then used the brand new technology of telegraph and telephone to convey that information to the League of Nations.
I see.
So an indexing system, accessing system, and communication system. So many people credit Otlet as, doing the first Google, like how do you store the world's information and then access and transmit it rapid fire, as that was his invention. But then he needed a building and a complete complex in which to house all this information.
Mm-hmm.
And he contacted Le Corbusier and he said, will you make the design for it so that I have a design for this world museum, which I can couple with my world information access system. And together we will go to the League of Nations and sell it to them that they should be building this on the banks of Lake Geneva.
But it's never built, right?
But it was never built.
Looking at the drawings of this, it looks very like purist, sort of a reinterpretation of the pyramids or something.
Yeah, it certainly totally looks like a pyramid. It looks like a pyramid. It is also a reinterpretation of, if you look at the representations of the Tower of Babel by Bruegel, the Flemish painter, one can interpret that also as a place where all the world's languages were stored, because in a sense, the problem that Otlet was trying to solve was that you can have a world congress, but the biggest issue in a world congress is that everybody speaks a different language, which means everybody has a different history and a different understanding of things, times, and events. And the thinking about League of Nations was that if we just bring people together and if we all understood each other and understood each other's points of view, which is basically a problem of translation and mistranslation, we would be able to solve. We wouldn't have conflict. That was basically the modernist utopian thinking. So Tower of Babel was, in a sense, an apposite metaphor. Of course, it's a biblical metaphor.
The program you're describing sounds a lot like the Museum of Knowledge also.
Yes, totally. So later on, you're jumping ahead. The Museum of Infinite Growth becomes the Museum of Knowledge later on. You've raised it, so we can talk a little bit about it. So Corbusier designed the Mundaneum. The project never happened. And then he nevertheless continued to design the museum in his other urban proposals, except that he changed it he didn't call it the World Museum or Mundaneum anymore. He started to call it the Museum of Infinite Growth, because he said, the amount of information that you would store in such a museum would have to keep growing, in a sense, infinitely, because the amount of knowledge, world knowledge, is infinite. It's not like it has to reckon with the problem that data keeps, we will call it data, but in his case, it would be artifacts, would keep being added non-stop. And the institution around it has to keep expanding its capability to rapidly access and interpret and present that information to whoever it needs. So he designed it as a museum of infinite growth.
So it's literally, it can infinitely keep going. The spiral grows outwards.
Yeah, so that was his concept, that you lift the entire building above the ground and you start it from the middle in a spiral, and the spiral can keep growing infinitely.
So it has to be a blank facade and the light has to come from top, I guess.
Yeah, so light has to come from top. And so, an infinitely growing museum from Corbusier's point of view set up the conceptual problem of cannot have a facade, because it is a never-ending building, and in the form of a spiral. It never has a front. It has a beginning and it never finishes. So it never has a front. So he masked off the front. He said, this is not a building with a facade, it's a building without a facade. So how do you make a facade for a building without a facade? Became this sort of complex problem that he tried to address in the making of the Museum of Infinite Growth.
So it is at the same time an interpretation of the miracle box as well, because that's also a classic like non-facade structure.
In a sense, in a sense. So once he had sort of the Museum of Infinite Growth figured out, the question was, how do you use the Museum of Infinite Growth, right? He didn't, I don't think he fully grasped, Otlet's information access systems. He said, well, there will be some access system, they'll figure it out. But he said, nevertheless, even after you have the access system, you still need people to be able to be shown the information. So he designed for that first what he called, a basic auditorium, right? So like the auditorium right next to the museum has a auditorium. Then he designed the gallery, which would have temporary exhibits. And this is like the Heidi Weber structure, which Shivdat Sharma reinterpreted and now is the Chandigarh Museum. There was no budget for that in Chandigarh. So he temporarily, in a sense, made the gallery that's in the basement of the museum, right as you're coming towards the entrance of the museum, there's a gallery over there, which sort of a curved space gallery, which sort of comes out. Yeah. So that was his temporary exhibit gallery until the actual temporary exhibits pavilion was made.
I see. Okay.
Right. But he never had the budget to build the temporary exhibits pavilion. That was built after his death. And then with that was to be designed the School of Art, which would be a place where, contemporary artifacts would continue to be built, which would, in a sense, continue the infinite spiral. Like, the work has to continue to be going on. So the museum is not a place where the past is fossilized and frozen, but the museum is a place which continues to support the production of the present and the future, a classic sort of future thinking modernist axiom. So that's how it all started. And as things happened, budget-wise, the first thing and programmatically, they said, well, we need the School of Art first. So because, we have students, we have to start the college, we have to hire faculty, we have to do this, we have to do that. Artifacts can just sit in some locked cupboard. We can come back to this. So the first place to be designed, in fact, was the School of Art. So that was the project that, my father, Aditya Prakash, started to work with Corbusier on. So
he was assistant during this.
He was the direct assistant on this project. So the system in the Chandigarh Capital Project Office was that, turn by turn, the Indian architects would be given the opportunity to work directly with Corbusier.
Sort of a mentorship.
Program. So, Prabhavalkar worked with Corbusier on the assembly. I think Jeet Malhotra worked with him on the secretariat.
And Yuli worked with him in the Lake Club, right?
On the Lake Club. And I think she also worked with him on the High Court. I'm not sure. Yeah, because she spoke French. She got to work on the very first building. So those big buildings, those people worked on. So when it came to the museum, then it kind of became my father's turn, and he worked on the School of Art. I'm not sure if M.N. Sharma worked with him directly on anything. So Shivdat Sharma was appointed, in a sense, to work with my father, because he was, rising up from the ranks through as a draftsman. And then when my father left to work on the agricultural universities in early 1963, his projects were handed over to Shivdat Sharma. So he must have completed the School of Art. Maybe, I'm not sure if he did. But the next project my father was going to work with Corbusier on was the big museum. So instead, Shivdat Sharma worked with Corbusier. That's how that happened.
But there was a big delay in it being constructed. It was made much later, right?
No. The museum was made in the 60s.
Okay, I'm talking about the Architecture Museum, the other one, the Heidi Weber one.
The Heidi Weber, the Museum of, that was made in the 70s. M.N. Sharma got the money to build that. M.N. Sharma got the money to build the temporary exhibits pavilion, or what is now called the Chandigarh Museum. And he got the money to build the Open Hand and the Geometric Hill. All these sort of other projects were sort of made happen by M.N. Sharma after Jean-Rey Corbusier's death.
But this, I think, act of translation keeps coming up in this complex, in all of them. In fact, the art museum is sort of, like we were talking about, the Museum of Infinite Growth, and the College of Art, the Audiovisual Training Center, as they used to be called, later became the College of Architecture via Aditya Prakash, and the Heidi Weber Pavilion in Zurich? Yeah. In Zurich became the now Architecture Museum.
Right.
And I think you've written in the guide, Chandigarh guidebook, you've mentioned that the auditorium to the museum is sort of an abstraction of Ronchamp.
Yes.
Oversimplification, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
reminiscent of it. Yeah.
Don't you think? Don't you think it's sort of
Yeah.
a
I mean, after having read that, yeah, I can see
yeah,
that.
once you see it, right?
So yeah, it's very intriguing to, become aware of that, this active act of translation in all of these buildings which have to do with education and, mind nourishment.
Mhm.
So as a very present design strategy.
Yes. I mean, so Corbusier was constantly reinterpreting himself, I mean, he would take an old building and an old project and kind of redo it. We saw that already in the assembly. He had completely designed the building, then he completely redesigned it, right? So he designs the Mundaneum, which is completely done, but then he redesigns it as the Museum of Infinite Growth and transforms it, right? And the big thing that happened while Corbusier was designing the Chandigarh Museum and he was executing the Ahmedabad Museum and the Tokyo Museum, which are basically all in the sort of same language of the Museum for Infinite Growth, two major things happened at this time. Is that number one, Corbusier also, with Xenakis' help, designed the Philips Pavilion in Brussels. All right. A fantastic, really complex hyperbolic paraboloid structure, which most people now primarily credit the design of the external shell to Xenakis, the Greek architect, mathematician, composer. But Corbusier told him, I want a structure which looks like a stomach and kind of, so that it doesn't never has a clear. So Xenakis designed these hyperbolic paraboloids going on like a really complex structure. And Corbusier said, yeah, okay. And that is the predecessor, as far as I can see, that structure is the predecessor of B.V. Doshi's Hussain Doshi Gufa much later. This is unremarked, but I'm quite sure that Doshi was subconsciously or perhaps even consciously thinking about the Philips Pavilion when he was making the Hussain Doshi Gufa, because that also is a series of stomachs. And he was very excited. He gave the structural drawings to Rajay. Was it Rajay or somebody in Ahmedabad? Did the structural drawings, which has all these lines, and he wanted them to also have a catenary character. I'm not sure whether that worked out, but that's a paper worth writing of how you get from Xenakis Corbusier's Philips Pavilion to Doshi's Hussain Doshi Gufa. There's a kind of again, like you're saying, translation. It's all about translations.
Maybe a bit of Gaudi influence somewhere.
Well, you can see a little bit of Gaudi, and Gaudi is also all catenary curves, right? All of Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, etc., are also catenary curves, which is to say they are ruled surfaces. So that's the beautiful thing about these. These are not like abstract anything forms. They are all forms that are ruled surfaces. In that sense, they are very rational structures, right? So yeah, definitely there's Gaudi in there. So when Corbusier built the Philips Pavilion, he was totally enchanted by the miracle box, right? In the 1920s and 30s, when he saw his first movies inside a theater, he was like completely mesmerized by it. It's like, this is the most amazing thing I have ever seen. It's the miracle of modern technology.
Right.
So he called it a miracle box, which is sort of a translation of the magic lantern, right? Maybe there's some French, because I think the magic lantern was, did Bergman call it a magic lantern or whatever? The cinema was called the magic lantern. The movies were called magic lanterns, the projection system. So the box Corbusier called was a miracle box, the magic lantern in a miracle box.
So in modern architectural pedagogy, when they say black box, black box theater, that's
theater, which is not that different. Theaters in general are also black box. They are not about bringing light in. But that's only modern theaters. There was a conference held in the 1950s on the design of modern theaters. And Corbusier proposed that, theaters should be completely boîte à miracle or miracle boxes, closed off boxes. And the bunch of European theater people completely objected. And they said, no, Look at Epidaurus. Look at all the great old Greek theaters. They were in the completely open, and they were, nestled into the landscape. And it is about being able to connect the larger open landscape to the space of the theater and so on. And so that's how Corbusier transformed the design of his miracle box into one that could both function inside and outside. So I don't know if you've seen his designs of his miracle box. They have there's a box, and then there's a stage, and behind the stage wall is like a sliding door. You can open it up, and then it's open from the back, and there is open air seating on the other side.
Oh,
so it's like a schizophrenic thing, which both can work on the inside or can work on the outside. Or if you're crazy, you can remove the wall and make it work both inside and outside from both sides.
I see.
And I've covered it, I think, a little bit in my new book, Le Corbusier's Chandigarh Revisited. I think I have diagrams of all of this in there. If you look, well, I don't see the diagrams, but anyway, they are there. So basically, Corbusier's thinking was, this is the first of the two amazing things, like, well, when you want to present the information of the artifacts, you can't reduce it down to words. You got to present it as films so that you can draw relationships amongst visual things, along with music, because the coherence, the understanding, the aesthetic, cultural character of the things is not words, it's a visual symphony. So when he was designing the temporary exhibits pavilion in Brussels, Corbusier allowed Xenakis to design the miracle box, in a sense. You can see the Phillips Pavilion as a miracle box, which meant that it didn't have to take a cubic form, but Corbusier's contention was that it could have any shape. And Corbusier invested all of his energy in designing the audio-visual film inside the Brussels Pavilion.
Right.
Right. And that film, a sort of a flat version of it is available online. What is it called?
Poème Electronique.
Yeah, Poème Electronique. And he asked Edgard Varèse to do the music for it. And the funny thing over there was it's like a truly collage montage. Not only is the film a collage montage of images which move around in the space. The space was completely black. They would admit, 40, 50 people at a time. And then you weren't allowed to leave in between. You had to wait. I think it was an 8-minute film or something like that. You had to watch the whole thing, and the images would move all over the walls. And Varèse's weird music would play. And he commissioned Varèse to do the music. Corbusier didn't see the music till the day the pavilion opened. So it was like timed.
Oh, I see.
Corbusier designed the visuals, Varèse designed the music, and they both came together and saw the two combination on the day of opening.
But Varèse hadn't seen the film before either?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I
it's
wish
very
they
much
would recreate it,
Yeah, it'd be lovely to, these kind of collaborations to redo. I mean, similarly, much, much, much later, when Ravi Shankar and Philip Glass collaborated on their Passages album, they gave each other, so it's like the Passages symphony, it has 6 movements or something, one by Philip Glass, one by Ravi Shankar, one by Philip Glass, one by Ravi Shankar, one by Philip Glass, one by Ravi Shankar. So they both agreed on a sort of general passage that they would start with a sort of a slow prayer or something and end with a resolution. But that each one would compose one each. And they gave each other like beginning notes, or like a mukhra, as we say in India, or sort of like a base template.
I see. Like a exquisite corpse.
And they separately composed their individual pieces, and then they just stitched them together. So that's how Passages was also made. So it's an interesting way to sort of collaborate. There are many, possibilities of collaboration. But anyway, this is how, all these are side notes. For point being that Corbusier wanted to invent the institution whereby you could present visual information, not just saying here, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this. He said, when you present the information, the very formatting and presentation of information makes a argument. So he made a possible film, an audiovisual film, which is the Poème Electronique. which, surprise, surprise, ends with his own buildings and the open hand. But anyway.
Yeah. It's kind of like his 2001.
It is his 2001. But remember, he's doing this in 1955, 56.
Yeah.
It's one of the most avant-gardist pieces of composition, even today. But that was a great milieu. John Cage was, doing different things in America at that time. And modern day people like Philip Glass, etc., Robert Reich, etc., they come out of this tradition. And I think you're trained a little bit in this tradition also through RISD, I think. I'm not sure, in your sort of weird compositions that I've heard you play. To return to the thing, so that is how he re-Christianed the School of Art as the audio-visual training center, right? He said it's not old 19th century conceptions of art by itself. Somehow you stand in front of a painting and you are sort of moved in a magical way. Rather, that you have to produce state-of-the-art contemporary audio-visual presentations using the technology of the miracle box or the cinema hall, basically, but not even as a static image. The image should move three-dimensionally everywhere, on every wall, and the walls don't have to be flat. The walls can take any shape whatsoever. And that's the direction we need to go in. So it's like when you ask what is a black box theater in theater is not that, it's basically a space in which the audience sits in 360 degrees in every direction, instead of a standard proscenium stage with audience on one side and the stage on the other. That's what black box theater means in theater. But in Corbusier's world, it's a black box cinema where there are images and audio on every surface, and they move around and they kind of make a collage.
So why was that name dropped, the Audiovisual Training Center?
Nobody understood what the hell he was talking about, Imagine playing Edgard Varèse in 1955 in Chandigarh. People will say, "The pagal hai sala."
Also, the Architecture Museum was initially called Pavilion of Temporary or Traveling Exhibitions for the Synthesis of Plastic Arts.
That's right. So that came out of a meeting. I think not Miro, but who's that guy? The other artist with an M, Matisse. I think Matisse called a meeting of architects, musicians, painters, and everybody said. And he said, we need to produce a synthesis. And Corbusier was there at that meeting. And Corbusier said, okay, I will design a pavilion in which, these temporary exhibits would come together, which would produce the synthesis amongst the arts.
So this is the program for the Heidi Weber.
And that became then the program
Pavilion.
That was supposed to be the program for the Heidi Weber, for synthèse among these arts. So on the one hand, there is the miracle box about how to show relationships amongst the arts. And then there was this temporary exhibits pavilion, which was supposed to be house exhibits among synthesis amongst the arts.
Mm-hmm. Although that was more of a house museum, right? Because it had rooms to live in, and so programmatically slightly different.
No, not really. So basically the design of that was two umbrellas. There was a central, two squares, two double square, and two umbrellas on top of that. One turned down, one turned up. I don't know why one turned up, one turned down. Those had to be interpreted like the two roof solutions. I think, you can have a roof that comes down or a roof that sheds water, either sheds water or collects water. I think that's sort of a bit. Umbrella also, up, umbrella down.
A little bit like the 24 solar hours.
Like 24 solar hours, option one, option two. It's kind of that kind of option. And then basically in the early sketches, the rooms below were like boxes on the side of a shipping wharf piled up. In the old days, when you went to the shipping wharf and they would unload boxes, there would be boxes of every possible size from around the world unloaded onto the sides of ships. And they would all be piled up. And Corbusier loved that. He said, this is what the whole world looks like, boxes of various sizes. Boxes show up. And he said, they are temporarily there. And he was inspired by that to say that that's what a temporary exhibits pavilion might look like. And he sort of formalized it in 1939 as the proposal for the pavilion of an exposition in Belgium, which was also not built. It could be large scale also, but that's what, like the Museum of Infinite Growth was permanent exhibits. These were great artifacts, but temporary exhibits would be of the synthesis. So, the Boite Miracle Box and the temporary exhibits for pavilion are two things go together.
Right. Because he was also doing the Carpenter Center around the same time in Cambridge.
Yes, that's a very good point. Right? I've never made that connection, but you can think of the Carpenter Center also.
That's also right next to a museum, right? That's next to.
Yeah, I think so.
The Fog Museum. Yeah.
Yeah, but it has the stomachs. It has two stomachs, right?
Yeah, I was just looking at the plan. Like one of the temporary exhibits section of the main museum sort of looks like one of those stomachs from the Carpenter Center.
Totally. Yeah, the
lungs or stomachs. Yeah, whatever you
lungs or stomachs. No, I think they were stomachs. They were not lungs. They were stomachs.
Okay.
Yeah, although the galleries at the Carpenter Center, I think all have windows.
Yeah.
The gallery in Chandigarh, the one that's like a stomach in the basement, I think it has a window at the very top. Does it have a window at the very top, or does it not have a window at the very top?
Not sure.
I mean, the best interpretation of that object was, I think, done by BP Mathur when he designed the Fine Arts Museum in Punjab University. That's a beautiful building. He has those are all boxes. And then they have a strip window at the ceiling. And that strip window at the ceiling enables light to come in an undisturbed fashion. And then it has the roof in the form of a downward turn umbrella, right? Held up on a single column, correct?
Oh, yeah.
So that's very much an interpretation of the temporary exhibits pavilion. I don't know how BP Mathur got that. But that's a brilliant interpretation of that design.
Yeah.
Sharma's is more of a transliteration, how to take the form and sort of redo it in other materials and other programs. Whereas BP Mathur's is a sort of a strict translation in the sense he takes the concept and redoes it in a different way. So that's the genealogy of all these structures.
We haven't covered the Natural History Museum.
I don't think anybody understood what a miracle box is and like how to make it or whatever. It's a museum of the evolution of life. Isn't it what it is?
Oh, yeah.
Randhawa wanted a diorama which shows how life evolved over time. Basically a Darwinian evolution, which is a fantastic idea. I love that. And then he gave the project to Shivdat Sharma, and Shivdat Sharma did a very beautiful building to house it. Just gorgeous, classic of Chandigarh modernism. That building that Shivdat Sharma designed and his original design of the golf club.
Oh, yeah. What happened to that? It's gone now.
Yeah, well, it got transformed over time and, made into weird shit. But but the original design is just gorgeous. So that's how all these things happen. Now, of course, another interpretation of the miracle box is my father, Aditya Prakash's Tagore Theatre, which is also a miracle box, basically, but in theatre form, right? Not in a film form.
That's true.
With two miracle boxes kind of jammed together, two miracle boxes, and they kind of mated together. And at the point of intersection is the theatre, is the stage.
Yeah.
That was the original design. Then, of course, Madam Namita came along and sort of made it into an auditorium through stupid preservation concepts. It's such a disaster. It's just a lack, no sense of history, no sense of architectural lineage or understanding of Corbusier. Yeah, I think even today in Chandigarh, nobody really understands these buildings.
Yeah, I think they're happy to just keep the shell as if the shell is the building.
Keep the shell and then add glass to it and chalo ho gaya bas. Baki amplification se auditorium bana lenge. So it's
there's a drastic difference. Yeah, in the acoustic quality is completely gone. Yeah,
completely gone. Anyway, but to stay in that lineage, I think my father, he took two projects. One, he got the College of Architecture project, which he did a translation from the School of Art, and which was like, again, in the Shivdat Sharma tradition, a sort of a faithful transliteration. But even in a faithful transliteration, in that case, there is dissonance because of certain economies of scale that were present. And then Shivdat Sharma transliterated the temporary exhibits pavilion, moved it from metal to concrete and added a basement. So that was his version of doing things.
I think, there's something in common, maybe for another episode, between Tagore and the Mathur Museum of Fine Arts? Just pure elevation,
Yes, totally.
The glass
Yeah.
becomes concrete. Yeah.
Correct, exactly. They are totally connected. That's a brilliant observation. They're also intersecting boxes. So they're very much connected. That's wonderful. And one can think of the principal's residence in Sector 12 also as kind of a little bit of an iteration of that, but not that much.
Do you think the Venice Hospital had anything to do with this
Oh, yeah.
lineage?
So Venice Hospital, I think, also comes out of the similar preoccupation. Yeah. So Venice Hospital belongs to that language also. Yes.
It's like the same concept extrapolated across a
Yeah, that's right.
larger area. Yeah.
Correct. Venice Hospital is in the lineage of very much the Fine Arts Museum in Punjab University. Of course, the Venice Hospital, it jogs around and whereas in Museum of Infinite Growth has a very regulated spiral.
Did Corbusier also do completely the interior and the materials of the museum?
Totally. He
like
designed
the red
everything
on the ceiling.
yeah. Everything, including the skylights at the top and how they also collect the water and the fantastic gargoyles at the end that collect the water and drop it into the pools at the bottom. Now, I wonder if he designed the original display, and I wonder if there's an NID connection there and the Ames connection and so on.
Right. I think there are some understudied connections here because there's, mini boga chairs in the museum kind of out of nowhere.
But those things were also happening at the same time. Charles and Ray Ames were in Ahmedabad doing these things. So there was a culture of design that was being established. That's what Vishal Khandelwal, you remember,
Oh, yeah.
the guy who was working with us on my father's book, was working on. A number of other people have also worked on that. I think Saloni Mathur has also worked on that. So there's a conversation to be had. But again, it's this thing that the modernism was about the synthesis of the arts. This is a concept that, is hinted at a little bit. Stanislas von Moose's classic old book on Corbusier is called Elements of a Synthesis. But he only talks about things that went into Corbusier's architecture and maybe to a certain extent painting. But it's actually everything. I used it extensively in my first book on Chandigarh. Stanislas Stani, great historian.
I think he also wrote this text called Ruins in Reverse for Scheidegger's photo book, Chandigarh 1956. Anyway, the doors in all of these buildings, is it the only place where the revolving metal doors happen other than the Capitol? Maybe also in the university in some places.
Yeah, I think maybe that door, revolving door, Gandhi Bhavan, Pierre-Genre used it. Maybe it's there somewhere else also. But I think it was invented, that thing, that pivoted door was invented by Corbusier in Ronchamp. I think that's where it was used first.
I see.
Ronchamp has that door. And then he used it, or maybe he invented in for the assembly in Chandigarh. It's co-created.
But it does make sense in the context of these, institutional buildings to have these wide open entrances. Right.
Yeah, before we finish this off, one of the other interesting things about the museum is that, as you enter, right behind the entry counter is a fantastic Satish Gujral mural. Anyway, that's an interesting thing also. Satish Gujral got sent to Mexico to look at Diego Garcia and all these people as a kind of a non-aligned network of artists and brought it back. I mean, it's really a sad thing. Satish Gujral became, sort of virulently anti-Chandigarh later on in his life, I think, which is so sad.
How come?
Who knows? I think Delhi postmodernist thinking, 70s something. But his early work is just amazing, But, by the time Satish Gujral designed the Belgian embassy, a very strange building.
Oh, by the way, there's a balcony in the museum, the only kind of opening in the facade.
Corbusier's thinking was, as you go through this infinite spiral, every now and then you're just going to be exhausted.
And the library, I think, was initially based on a donation from MS Randhawa.
Yes.
I think.
So that's the Randhawa papers. And they were all used to sit in that library over there. And when I started my Chandigarh book, nobody used to access those papers, and nobody really knew about them. And I used to sit in that library and go through the Randhawa papers. Then I would have to get their permission, and they would send some guy with me with those original books to a photocopier in Sector 11, and they would photocopy the pages I wanted. And then the guy would bring the books preciously back, and I would get the photocopies. I still have those photocopies from those.
And now they're kind of sealed behind
Now they're
glass. which-
sealed and glass.
but the
and
glass
then
is like
it
not locked. It's like taped up. There's like duct tape on the glass.
I see.
But yeah, whose idea was it to make the temporary exhibits building into a architectural and furniture archive?
So first it was just an architecture archive and had this exhibits, and I think that was Vatas. I think Vatas did that. Vatas in collaborate when he was principal of Chandigarh College of Architecture, working with whoever was the administrator at that time, finance secretary, I think. But I think that was Vatas. And then the furniture was put in after the controversy of the furniture.
Really?
Yeah, the original exhibition just had some, the Nivar things from Pierre Jeanret's house. But then a lot more furniture got put in after people got like, oh my God. But for a long time, it was empty and unused. And that's how in 1994, we did the Theaters of Decolonization Conference. We held the conference in the temporary exhibits pavilion. Because it had 2 rooms, we were running simultaneous sessions in the 2 rooms.
Wow. So you're probably the only users of the original sort of program.
Yes, we are the only user, in a sense, users of the original. But I should look for pictures of that, of us running sessions in that space. Yeah, that's it. And it's a beautiful, fabulous complex. I have to say, I love it. It's very peaceful. It has a strong sense of calmness of mind. You go to the Capitol complex, that's not a calm place. That's a very agitated place. You feel Corbusier's agitation. Future is unknown and, it's complicated and big drama. And, it's not a calm place.
It's very intellectually charged.
Charged.
Yeah.
But when you go to the museum complex, it's peaceful.
Corbusier was also at ease here because the politics is sort of removed from the program. So
that's right.
Maybe he was having more fun.
He was having more fun, and this was a project and, a program and a system of putting things together that was well rehearsed in the Corbusian imagination. He's like, yeah, he could, it's like one of those buildings. It's like the Curuchet house in La Plata in Argentina. He never even visited the building, and it's a masterpiece. The Curuchet house is like the mill owner's building. The Curuchet house, mill owner's building, and the Carpenter Center are just like all first cousins, maybe even siblings. They are like really like the same building. Theoretical abstractions kind of played around. So, the New York 5 architecture of the 1970s kind of comes out of those buildings. You can look at Richard Meyer's work or Eisenman's work, early work. You can look at the entire Getty Center, and it's like a exposition, a kind of elaboration of the Curuchet house.
Thanks for listening to The Story of Chandigarh. This is your host and producer, Ishan Chawla. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email us at storyofchandigarh@gmail.com. We'll continue our conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is The Story of Chandigarh.